Welcome to the CRD in Context. My first guest today is Blair Humphrey. Blair is a past president of the Fairfield-Gonzales Community Association. Blair, thanks for your time today. So back in 2010, you spent about 2 years as a member of the Citizens Advisory Committee in developing the official community plan for the City of Victoria. So tell us about that committee.
We had about, over a dozen members. The chair of all the meetings was a staff member from the city, but we had a number of citizen participants.
So how did they select the citizens as citizen reps?
That's a good question, which I don't remember the answer to. I think basically the city put out an invitation and a whole bunch of us applied. And then the mayor decided.
Okay.
I think it was fairly clear the mayor made the decision.
So is there a fair representation from its different neighborhoods around the city?
Pretty much, I would say, yeah.
So nobody was left out?
Not specifically, no.
Yeah. So it took 2.5 years to develop and had input from over 6,000 people. So 6,000 people, is that too many? Too few?
Well, the 6,000 number that is put out actually doesn't necessarily refer to 6,000 different people, because it was the sum of all the people who participated in the community processes. And quite often you would see the same people at more than one event, so they would be double counted.
Okay. So those that were really keen might go to 2, 3, 4 different events.
Oh, easily.
Easily.
Yes, easily. Because the events were very interesting and well produced, you could learn a lot by going to one of the city's events.
But I imagine if you went 5 times, you weren't there to learn more stuff. You were there to
Yes, definitely. To
input
put
again.
input again.
Okay. And in terms of the, the final product, was to what degree was the input of the people who participated reflected in the final document?
Well, by and large, very well represented. One of the main issues was that the plan should be based on the villages, all the local urban villages.
So these were the small and large urban villages like Cook Street Village, like Hillside Quadra Village?
Yeah, all of those. And in fact, the outcome said that that's the way it would work, but in fact, the first neighborhood to be looked at was Burnside Gorge, which was not identified by any of the participants as the most important village. In fact, it's not a village.
When you say looked at, how do you mean?
The official community plan wanted to avoid neighborhood plans, and the community plan calls them local area plans.
For a specific village?
For a village or a part of a neighborhood, but a much more manageable size.
Rather than a whole neighborhood.
And this, in large part, by the way, has got to do with cost. This official community plan, not including all the time that the volunteers spent on it, cost well over $1 million.
In terms of staff time and
staff time and so on. So doing a full neighborhood plan was seen as far too expensive. And I think we see the outcome of that in that it took almost 4 years for the Burnside Gorge neighborhood plan to get done, and I have no idea how much it cost. Nor would I know how to find out how much it cost.
It took 4 years?
Almost.
Okay. Because I know I was on the Gonzales neighborhood plan and steering committee, and it took just over 2 years. As for cost, I don't know, like you. But at the end of the day, was the process, the number of people who participated, and the incorporation of their perspectives, was all of that sufficient to give legitimacy to? Is that a legitimate plan?
Oh, yes, I think so. Depending on what you think the plan is for.
Well, the plan, as they say, it's described as a set of high-level objectives and policies that guide land use planning, and it's supposed to provide direction for growth and change over the next 30 years.
Yes, and I think it does that. But I think you have to distinguish the fact that it was accepted as a bylaw does not mean that it is a law, in the sense that there is nothing in the plan that thou must do. The plan is, to a very large degree, a guidance document.
As opposed to like a speeding ticket, you're over.
Right. If you're over this,
Boom.
there's your fine.
Okay.
Or you go to jail or something.
You go to jail. Well, so has it done a good job of guiding since it was adopted in 2012?
Yes and no. It does provide a lot of guidance. The problem comes that some folks only accept the guidance that they agree with.
Are these elected folks or non-elected
Both.
folks? Both. Okay.
Both. And others argue in favor of the OCP when it suits them, but not otherwise. It was described as being out of date within months of being produced.
Well, it's been updated 16 times
16 times
since
since 2012.
16 times since 2012.
Yes.
Wow.
What the updates refer to, though, are land use designations as a general. Heritage designations, that kind of thing, as opposed to specific rezonings. Rezonings are a totally separate issue.
It's a separate process.
It's a separate process, and it goes through a different set of
steps
to get done.
So in terms of the I guess the plan is going to be determined whether it's a good plan or bad plan, as you say, based on how it's interpreted by the various individuals who are affected, whether they're elected or unelected.
It will, from my perspective, it will be interesting to look at the city. It's still a bit early yet. It's only 5 years or so.
Yeah. And it's to guide it for 30 years.
It's for 30 years.
30-year plan.
2040 sometime.
Yeah.
And it will be interesting to look, say, in 2020, after it's been in place for 8 years, or 2022, to see whether the city resembles what the plan was hoping it would resemble. But we won't know that until later.
Well, do you not a long time frame, but so far, do you see it resembling? Do you see the city beginning, developing in a way that resembles what?
For the most part, yes.
Okay.
For the most part, yes. The significant differences tend to be where developers, in particular, look at the plan and its guidance and consider that to be the beginning of where they can start asking for additional development, additional floor space, additional. So in that sense, I was disappointed, personally disappointed, that it's taken not as the guidance, but as the stepping stone, the first step,
a jumping off point.
A jumping off point.
Okay. The other part that I read was the OCP encourages a strong downtown core and a network of vibrant, walkable villages and town centers. And so has it successfully done that so far?
Well, I don't know, because we've never done a local area plan for any of the town centers or the urban villages.
So none of the urban villages, either small or large, have had a local area plan attached to
No.
them.
Again, it's a problem of cost, I believe.
Right. So you had a lot of experience regarding development. So you sat on this committee at the high level, OCP, for 2 years, but you've also got a lot of experience regarding development at the neighborhood level because you were president of the Fairfield-Gonzales Neighborhood Association for 1, 2, 3 terms?
3 terms.
3 terms. So what happens when OCP meets whatever local plans are in place, whether it's a neighborhood plan or just governing a smaller, like in Fairfield, there's the cathedral, there's a couple of local area plans in Fairfield, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So what happens when OCP, big level plan, meets local plan, if there is any, meets proposed development? So you got these 3 influences coming together.
I think the Cook Street Village represents the best
Okay.
case study for that.
Yeah, fairly recent.
Cathedral Hill and Humboldt Valley were pretty innocuous.
Okay, look at Cook Street Village. It's been in the news quite a bit recently, and there is a development there. So Cook Street Village is designated a large urban village with a maximum of 6-story buildings. A 6-story building was proposed in Lower Cook Street Village, met with a lot of resistance by local residents. And one suggestion was to have the Cook Street Village redesignated as a small urban village with a maximum of 4-story buildings. So you live in the neighborhood. What do you think?
Well, I think the concept of the Cook Street Village being a small urban village is nonsense.
Because it's just too big?
It is a large urban village.
Yeah,
All you have to do is go down and take dinner or a coffee or whatever. It's a very active neighborhood.
And it's basically,
center.
it's sort of like the number of services that are provided that differentiate a large from a small urban village.
Well, a small urban village could be as much as a drugstore and a
Real
coffee
small.
shop. Really small.
Yeah.
But a large urban village, such as the Cook Street Village, is different.
Okay, so
And the Hillside Quadra Village and so on.
Right.
And anybody who thinks in terms of what those locations are like must see a difference between that and the corner of Fairfield and Foul Bay, for example, which is a small urban village.
right, it's got a drugstore and a coffee shop.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, so redesignation to small is off the table.
I hope so.
So, in terms of a 6-story development max, is that too much for a large urban village?
No.
You think it's okay?
Yeah. If I can comment, there is an image provided in the OCP of what a large urban village looks like. And unfortunately, this image was never vetted by the committee. But it looks
It's like a schematic, right?
No, it's, yeah, sort of.
Okay.
But it looks like downtown.
Okay.
It doesn't look like a village. And I think that was a really unfortunate image to present. And that has caused a lot of, in my view, a lot of the angst over the present application in the Cook Street Village, which is still unresolved, I believe. Or maybe it's not.
Not sure where it's. Oh boy, they had a vote. I have lost I've lost track of that one. So in terms of building height, there's much talk about how high is too high of a building for our Victoria skyline.
Yeah.
So recently there was approval for 2 21-story buildings downtown Yates Street and a 15-story on Belleville. So is that good or bad for our skyline?
I don't think it's bad at all. I think the important component of this is that we keep some of the neighborhoods like Old Town and so on down so that people approaching the city from the water or from elsewhere can see over it and see things behind. And having tall buildings in the city itself,
Like more in the middle of the city.
in the middle of the city, I don't think that's going to affect anybody.
How about the 30-story building being pitched for the old Hudson's Bay site on Douglas Street? Is that too high? It's at the center. It's at a high point in the city.
I'm not sure that there is anything that is too high. And I say that not because I want to see a whole bunch of 30-story buildings around, but I don't see how the actual height, the maximum height, should be defined other than by a local area plan or the downtown core area plan or something like that. And frankly, I don't remember how those buildings would fit with the downtown core area plan, which preceded the community plan.
Well, should we have first then developed a bunch of local or neighborhood plans and then somehow combine them into an official community plan?
Well, from my perspective as a neighborhood person, that's the route that I would prefer to take. And one of the problems that's going on in Cook Street right now is that it was designated as being one of the early local area plans, and it hasn't happened.
It's still not done.
No.
Other than the guidance provided by a designation of large urban village, which is fairly broad and general.
I hope I'm right when I say it hasn't been done, because I'm not a participant anymore.
Right. Just got a couple of minutes left here, Blair. Sometimes developers are granted density bonuses in return for affordable housing. A number of units are, below market pricing. So have we, through the planning process, have we extracted as much as we can from the developers towards this end?
Well, we have a plan to extract as much as we can. There's some quite recent reports in 2016 that identify how that might happen, and it uses what are called community amenity charges.
Right.
And in order to get the density and so on, the developer would have to pay quite significant amounts into a fund, which could then go to actually building affordable units. The problem we have in Victoria, of course, is that we don't have city-owned space to build these things on. So I don't know how that will work itself out. But the city's planning department is certainly trying to figure out how to manage the increased density and the affordability. Because in general, people who build these large buildings now, they don't build affordable housing in them.
No. Blair, I wish we had more time, but 18 and a half minutes goes by pretty quickly.
Yeah, it did.
Okay, I really appreciate you coming in today.
Thanks a lot.
That concludes part one of the CRD in Context. My second guest today is former Oak Bay Councillor Pam Copley. Thanks for your time today, Pam.
You're welcome.
So in your previous role as a councillor and in your current role as the chair of the Advisory Planning Committee in Oak Bay, in Oak Bay, you've thought a lot about housing and you've learned a lot about housing.
Absolutely.
Good. So I'd like to focus on housing today if we can. Just to begin, there's much talk of the importance of ensuring a diversity of housing options. So why is a diversity of housing options so important?
Well, first of all, and I would go right back to my days as on council and as the chair of the official community plan renewal committee. The OCP is our primary policy document, and it envisions and enables our community's current and future sustainability, and part of that is enabling housing options. As you're most likely aware, Oak Bay is pretty much known, has been for some time, as a place for single-family homes. Increasingly, that's becoming less affordable for a larger percentage of the population. The OCP process, the consultation process, the discussions that took place at that time, anticipated the changes that would happen in terms of housing, and it became very clear through the conversations we had in the community throughout that consultation process over about 2 years that housing options that were needed both by seniors who wanted to age in place, newcomers coming to the community who couldn't afford single-family homes, or young professionals, for example, singles, young families trying to get a housing start. Oak Bay was becoming more and more unreachable in terms of the prices, and that's, of course, continued over recent years, too. And the rental market has been in great demand as well. And we know what the availability or lack thereof has been in rental accommodation, and also in construction of new rental housing. Mm-hmm. That's been a big gap in our community, and I believe in the region as well. And so the notion of housing and housing diversity, and what housing diversity means in terms of Oak Bay, i.e. housing options. So housing that accommodates more than one family became a very important part of the discussion. How that played out, again, is envisioned in the OCP, but we're still not quite there in terms of how that happens literally on the ground.
Well, I know that there's, in terms of how to ensure a diversity of housing options for the range of people looking to, move into Oak Bay. There's like secondary suites, garden suites. Yes. That's a very common form of having a diversity of housing options. But why is there? And this means densification.
Yes.
So why is there always seem to be such a resistance to densification?
Well, my opinion is that densification, and again, I've heard it from many people too, I think it's a commonly misunderstood term. In our community, we've had a planner, a community planner, urban planner, I should say, for less than 3 years. Some of those...
On staff.
On staff, yeah. I'm sorry, yes, on staff. Not my staff anymore, but
no.
Our community staff, our municipality staff. So those common planning terms, terms that are used by planners all the time, were not as familiar with many people in Oak Bay. I think there was just a misunderstanding, and that misunderstanding is to some extent ongoing, about what densification actually means. What we learned is that densification really means provision of housing options. So densification is not a goal in and of itself. It's a means to an end. How do we provide more housing, more options for a range of incomes, ages, etc., by diversifying the housing stock, both the existing housing stock and planning for future housing options as well, and therefore keeping the population of our community vibrant and vital and sustainable, and the community itself sustainable. So again, that notion of densification is not a goal, it's a means to an end.
No, so as you say, if you look at your existing housing stock, there's an overwhelming number of single-family dwellings.
Yes.
So if you one form of diversifying the housing options and densification, through densification, would be to put a secondary suite in a single-family house.
Well, there has been much discussion about that as well. We guesstimate, and it's known that there are approximately 400 unregulated secondary homes, or secondary suites rather, in existing Oak Bay homes. They've been there in many cases for a very long time.
Is that the official estimate? Or are
there
these
is no official estimate because they're not regulated.
But these are sort of like the known ones.
They're known to be at least 400. I would suggest that the number is actually much higher.
Okay.
But the difficulty is that they're now operating in a very uncertain rental environment, if you will, and they're subject to closure at any time based on complaint. So again, this is problematic for people who are looking for an affordable option, for looking for a way to get into the community, for students who are looking for housing that are going to the university, for example. So it really is in our interests and our responsibility, I believe, and is envisioned again in the OCP policies, that we provide those and regulate the secondary suites.
Are they legal right now?
No, they're not legal right now, but we know that some of them have been there for a very long time.
Right.
We also know now that Council has just recently allocated in their budget for the upcoming year funding to begin the process of regulating secondary suites, and also to look at conversions, heritage conversions for the larger historic homes.
So the city is basically, I come to the conclusion that secondary suites is a good way of adding to the housing diversification.
It's been a controversial matter for some time. When I was, again, on council, I was part of the Secondary Suite Review Committee. And at that time...
How long ago was that?
That was, I think, 2010, if I recall correctly. And the community was very divided at the time. Since then, we've come to realize that there is much greater support for regulation of secondary suites for a variety of reasons. One of them is affordability, both for the homeowners and for the tenants,
so
potential tenants.
Like before you can regulate them, you sort of have to accept
Well, it's accepted. The policy
Okay.
is stated and articulated in the OCP already.
Okay.
So we've moved forward from that. We discovered the acceptance level through the OCP survey and consultation process.
Did you say it had gone up since
It had gone up considerably. Approximately 70% of those who provided input into the survey or in other forms of during the consultation process agreed that regulation should happen. That process is underway. It should happen hopefully within the next year or so. But the first step is allocating money in the budget, and the council has done that.
Okay, so that's a positive step forward.
A positive step. The other, I would say, fairly, maybe I shouldn't say simple, because that is always, again, in the opinion of whoever it is you're speaking to. That the other option for us to provide fairly quick, affordable housing options is bringing into conformity with the zoning bylaw the duplexes that already exist, and there are approximately 300 of those in the community. Those, again, at the moment, they're called legal non-conforming in the current zoning bylaw. What that means is that they were pre-existing, and when the zoning was changed, where new duplexes were no longer possible to be built, then these became legal because they were pre-existing, but they were non-conforming. So bringing them into conformity with the bylaw, I believe, is not a terribly onerous process, but it is, of course, one that has to be managed by municipal staff. They already have quite a bit on their plate, and so the housing file is being implemented incrementally, but this is an important part of it.
Yeah. You were, so that's movement on one front. Recently you were in favor of an approved Cadborough Bay development. And it was going to provide up to 43 more units of housing.
Yes.
Which is, good for Oak Bay in terms of...
If I could just go back for 1 minute, this notion of housing or the secondary suites and how that came forward. The APC was requested by council to come up with proposals around housing that could be then moved forward to the estimates process and possibly be budgeted for in the upcoming year. So one of the recommendations that the APC made was to regulate secondary suites. Another one was to consider duplexes, and another one was to consider development over the longer term of a housing strategy. So the secondary suites component is the one that's currently moving forward.
Okay.
The Boker Creek, or the Cadborough Bay development, rather.
Okay, and the Cadborough Bay development is going to add 43 more units
Yes.
of housing. So is the problem, I guess the problem is mainly one of supply. So if we build enough housing units, if we just keep building, building, and building, well, prices gradually stabilize and vacancy rates go down to a more reasonable rate from where they are right now.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's a 0.5% vacancy rate, 0.5% vacancy rate.
Right. So your question is
Is supply.
supply.
Just build.
What is the supply?
Not
No.
so much what is supply, but is the way forward just to build.
No, I wouldn't say that. And again, I go back to our primary policy document, the OCP. It envisions managed, well-managed, thoughtful, and modest densification. Okay? So, and that also has to fit into what is seen to be sustainable within the community, acceptable, and desired based on
Sustainable
community
how?
needs. Well, to sustainable in the sense that it keeps the community vital. It addresses the ongoing needs of newcomers, of people who are moving into the community. That's what I mean by sustainable. It enhances and increases the sustainability of the community as a whole by increasing housing options. I think that's what I'm really trying to say.
So if you want it, if you really wanted a sustainable community, then you would seem to want to build more, because then you would build more. You'd bring more people in, the young families, that sort of thing.
Indeed. And again, I go back to that concept of modest densification, because that is part of what the community values. The community values its green space, its established neighborhoods, its streetscape. How do you increase the density in a modest and managed way without impacting in a negative way the character and the values of the community? So that's always the balance.
Quite the balancing
Well,
point.
it is a balance. It's true. It's not an easy one, but it's certainly addressed, and there are policies that enable that in the OCP. With regards to the Cadbro Bay project, there was significant discussion, shall we say, within the community. But it has been approved now, and I believe you would have seen the article, the editorial in the Times Colonist from the 17th of May, which supported the decision of Council.
Extremely supportive.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so what they said, the Times Colonist said, it's the right decision for the community. And I would add to that, it's in the right place, because that corner is zoned as secondary village in the OCP, which
Corner
means
of Bowker and
Cadbro Bay.
And Cadbro
That's
Bay.
right.
Yeah.
It is much bigger than anything that had been envisioned there, much bigger than anything that has been there in the past. But it's a very, I think the term has been tired corner in terms of its commercial viability.
Yeah.
It accepts the density from the surrounding area, which is primarily residential, except along the Cadbro Bay corridor. And I think those are positives. The developer has contributed a significant amount of money to addressing the ongoing, as long as I can remember, problems around traffic at that corner. It is a problem. It's not going to go away, but now is the time to find a solution to that, to revitalize that corner for the community as a whole and for the neighborhood. And I think this presents a real opportunity, and it provides 43 new units of housing, as you say, but it doesn't address affordability yet.
Well, we'll come to affordability in a second, but so 43 new units. Okay, so if my figures are correct, but correct me if I'm wrong here, Oak Bay experienced a 0% population growth rate
Yes.
in 2015 and 2016.
Yes.
So no, population stayed stable. And only 2 multifamily units have been built in the last 10 years.
Correct.
So my question is, how are you going to get the vitality that you're looking for, the diversity in housing options, to grow the population, to grow the tax base,
Yes.
and at the same time hang on to this kind of, well, it has to be modest, it has to be, I forget the other terms you used, but they were terms that suggested a slowness, if you will.
Well, let's just say paving paradise isn't in the vision and the policies of our OCP. And it also, again, the changes that have been identified as being acceptable to the community are those that do address the values, that keep that community character in place, the established neighborhoods. And honestly, I hear it all the time. I hear about how much that is what people love about Oak Bay, both the people who have lived there for a very long time, such as myself, and the walkability of the neighborhoods, the access to the village clusters. It's a very livable community. So how do you retain that livability, that viability, the resilience, and the community amenities when it's a completely built-out community surrounded by water basically on three sides? It's a challenge, but I think it's doable. But it can't be rapid growth. I mean, we're not in the same position. We don't have the land base that, say, Langford has.
No, it doesn't sound like. I don't think. It doesn't sound like too rapid growth is going to be the issue here.
Well, and there are also other issues on the horizon now too. For example, depopulation is a significant issue in communities like West Vancouver.
Right.
And they wrestle with some of the same problems we do: lack of housing options, lack of affordability. Beautiful community, but people are leaving. There's actually a depopulation happening in that community. It could happen here, and that very much can and probably will affect the viability and the future sustainability of that community, and possibly of our community as well, if we don't address the housing needs for people that want to come in to keep the community vital and vibrant.
Quite the challenge. Pam, I wish we had more time. 18 and a half minutes goes by very quickly.
Yeah, it certainly does.
Thanks so much for coming in today.
Thank you very much.
I really
appreciated the opportunity. Thanks so much.
That concludes this segment of the CRD in Context. My final guest today is Esquimalt Mayor and CRD Chair Barb Desjardins. Thanks so much for coming in today.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
Appreciate your time. So let's start with your most recent initiative, and that was as a BC Liberal candidate for Esquimalt Machosen. So you stepped aside from your CRD chair and your Esquimalt Mayor duties back the end of March to campaign. So in terms of like what goes on inside of your head, how do you compartmentalize? You leave two roles kind of on hold and you step into this brand new role. How do you do that inside of your head?
I found it a challenge, to be very honest with you. But the reason I did it was the sense that over the years, being mayor and being CRD chair most recently, that the disconnection that we have had with the province, not having somebody there in government that we could directly get representation with, has created a slowness to process in our region that's been harmful. I can speak to things like the sewage process, that it took a lot for us to get in and get to government and get government engaged in that process. Things like transportation, again, the same thing. We've gone in as a group of mayors or as CRD to get change, but there really hasn't been a real ability to affect change in a timely manner. I'm the kind of person that if something it isn't working well, I tend to try and figure out, okay, how can I affect that? And sometimes it's just trying to jump in, get on to the other side and work from the inside out.
Okay, but that was with a Liberal Party in power. As you say, there was a disconnect there, maybe not getting as much attention as we could or should have as a region. I'll come back to that in 1 second. But one quick question: as a provincial Liberal candidate, how did your profile and experience as mayor and or CRD chair, how did it work for you or against you?
Well, I think it helped people to recognize my candidacy. People are aware of good name recognition. Obviously, I was in a riding that was a very strong NDP riding. You know, that showed up in the results. I had the, I guess, honor, however, disappointment as well, that many people said to me, I love you so much as mayor.
I read that in the
I
paper.
can't support you in going forward. And I couldn't get them, I couldn't make the case for them that you're not losing me, you're just gaining me in a different position. And that was quite interesting. I mean, it was wonderful.
Very flattering.
Very flattering. But on the other hand,
Frustrating.
quite frustrating.
So yesterday the Green Party came out in support of the NDP with a supposed 4-year agreement. So what does that mean for the CRD? Assuming we do have an NDP government with John Horgan as premier, what does that mean for the CRD?
Well, I think with having both of those leaders live in this area should be a huge boost to the government listening to us.
Is that something you referenced before, that the disconnect? Now we have, like you say, 2 leaders.
Absolutely. And certainly many of us have had conversations, both with John Horgan and Andrew Weaver, about various projects in the region, opportunities and concerns. So, you know, it's my hope that this allows many of the issues that we've tried to push into government to get a little bit more airtime with government and some solution-oriented discussion and decision-making occurring for us. I'll give you one example that was very frustrating is many of the initiatives around climate change and many of the concerns that we put forward, we really didn't get traction with the previous government on that CRD put forward, and we didn't often get a response in as timely a manner as one would hope. The second part was around the governance review. Whatever happened to it? What's the end result of that? Is there more necessary to do? And certainly I believe...
This was the governance review that came out of the whole amalgamation issue.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah. So it'll be interesting because neither the Green Party nor the NDP touched that in the election, but the reality is it's sitting there. The big opportunity for the region, I think, is also in the transportation issue. Clearly, we heard from the West Shore that things have to be dealt with, and we're hearing, I mean, I heard that as the top priority coming from every doorstep that I went to.
So with your CRD chair hat on, so with respect to transit, so a few days ago I drove past the new Mackenzie Trans-Canada overpass construction. And I'll tell you, I couldn't help but think, you know, build it and they will come, you know. What will come are more cars. So what are your thoughts when you drive by the construction?
Well, I think it's a significant project and I think it's long overdue. Yes, more cars will come. But that's not the biggest issue in my mind. Is we'll always need roads, and as we move toward electric vehicles and zero emission vehicles, those roads will still be used. But we need to make that shift toward those vehicles so that people can still have that opportunity. What we in this region need, in my view, is an alternative. So we're opening up cycling trails along the ENN, but here's the corridor that goes from downtown to West Shore, almost directly, and it has sat there unused for too long. And
much talked about.
Much talked about, but somebody has to sit down, take the powers that they have, and make decisions happen and make action happen. And that's what we had put forward. That's what Minister Stone had moved forward, and there's a work being done on. I'm hopeful that that work is allowed to continue to move forward, and in fact it gains more attention and something can happen.
This was the working group that was struck, you know, with the province and, you know, 4 or 5 affected municipalities.
We have the municipalities, For the first time, we had BC Transit
BC
in
Transit,
the room, and
yeah.
that was probably the most significant piece, because transit has to work side by side with whatever happened on that corridor in order to get the whole region working systematically.
Well, you said fairly recent. You said, I feel strongly that a proposal for the ENN corridor for commuter service will move forward, and that we will see commuter rail in the capital region in the near future. So what's the near future?
Well, I think the study will show that it's viable based on the preliminary work that we have. And then we have to go through a few steps. One is we don't have the equipment, so we need to have funding put in place for that. We did have some sense that the province was willing to shift their funding to help this specific area of the corridor. Feds, we needed to get on side, so there's going to be a little bit of that. It would have been easier with a BC Liberal government, just based on what happened before.
But don't forget, you got your CRD chair hat on.
I know. Just because we knew what the steps were is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But the other part is the corridor needs some work on it, not as much as was originally said, because remember, we're only going from Langford down to Victoria. And in fact, that part of the rail system doesn't look too bad. So I would expect within a couple of years.
Okay. So is the lack of the terminus now being in Vic West as opposed to the terminus being in downtown Victoria with the elimination of the rail section of the new Johnson Street Bridge, is that a big issue for you?
I don't think so. Yes, it does have some limitation to it, but we can work around that. Again, if you have buses connecting right at that terminus and we do a loop around downtown Victoria, that will help the system. Many people are learning, because of the traffic and all of the issues around the Blue Bridge, that walking is a good way to do this.
That's
and
true.
to park on the Songhe side anyway.
Yeah.
So there's already a creation of a change there, plus the cycling as well. So, I think we're making that shift already. There isn't parking downtown anymore anyway, so if you could take a train, be able to catch a bus, get your way to the ledge very quickly. At D&D, they have looked at how they would connect their workforce to a train station. It can be done downtown as well.
Okay. So just to switch topics here. So a few months ago, there was a failure to reach consensus at the CRD on a regional growth strategy after, I guess, several years in the making. And it's gone to mediation rather than binding arbitration. So why is that?
Well, I think that we wanted to see if there were some of the concerns that municipalities put forward could be able to be worked out without being forced to make a decision. Each community that came forward with the word no came forward with many different topics within that. We didn't ever get the time to explore those littler issues and see if we could work them out. And so I think this is the opportunity to be able to provide that. There will probably be a couple that at the end of the day, it's going to be somebody else making the decision around. But certainly there were some concerns that Esquimalt put forward that I think were doable given a conversation.
Okay, so we're possibly just a conversation apart, in the sense if the right conversation takes place under the right in the right setting with the right facilitator, mediator, then we could get to yes.
Yes, I think so. As I said, John, there are probably a couple of issues. I think the water issue is still going to be a problem.
Mm-hmm.
There are very divided views on that, and almost right down the middle of CRD. So ultimately, I don't know that anyone's going to move off that position. So
And that was if you extend water, if you continue to extend the availability of municipal water out and out and out, then you're going to get growth. you're just going to continue to get sprawl.
Well, that's the sense of some.
Right.
You know, there are others that say no, that there are other ways that you control sprawl, sewage being one. But water is out to Machosen, and they have chosen to control growth there. So it can be done without controlling water. And I think you know, Mike Hicks brings forward a valid point. Is here we at CRD embraced the concept that water is a right for everyone, and then we're turning around and saying, no, you don't get the right.
Okay.
So, you know, philosophically, we're still going to have problems with that one.
Well, philosophically, there's a familiar argument that you're looking for some common ground with respect to bringing in a mediator. But the real problem is that you've got 13 individuals who each are there representing their local interests of their respective municipality. So what about a fully elected regional government? Is that going to solve the problem, or is it just going to add one more layer of government above, you know, that of the municipalities?
Well, I think that we need to look at, is there a better governance for regional issues? Because you're right, we come down there and it's the nature of the beast that we have to have our municipal hat on,
Sure.
representing that at CRD. So to have a clearly regional perspective is very difficult. I don't know whether you have to elect the whole regional government, because then what you do is you create another silo of government that may not even connect with what's happening in the municipalities, and I don't think that will be helpful. I have continued to throw out the concept of at least electing the chair. If that person is truly just elected by the region, their whole mandate...
By the population.
By the population, then their mandate is to try and bring consensus to the group at the table. I don't know whether that would be really throwing somebody into the fire or not.
Oh, that would be a tough one.
The other idea is around is representation by population the way to go? Because I think that the difficulty that we have when we can see that Victoria and Saanich could literally outweigh the rest of the region can really cause problems. And you see it when we have votes that speak about rural initiatives and concerns, and where the urban votes tend to make it either a close vote or overturn what decision has been made in a rural area.
Yeah, it's so I'll leave that one. I'll leave that one with you. Just got a couple of minutes here. I'm just looking at. I mean, you know, as mayor and as CRD chair, you had some experience with a sub-regional initiative in terms of people accusing Esquimalt of not really, you know, doing their fair share and allowing the McLaughlin site plant to be approved. And at the end of the day, when McLaughlin was approved, there was talk of Esquimalt having taken one for the team. You know, Esquimalt took one for the regional or sub-regional team. Was that some of your feelings?
You know,
did Esquimalt take one for the team?
Yes, we did, actually. Okay. But I think we made the project a lot better through the work or the protest that Esquimalt put through. As well, you know, I think that the whole process could have been done better had it been one of listening to all of the members, understanding their concerns, and trying to come to some conclusion where everybody got a win and everybody gave a little bit. That didn't occur in the first process at all.
Okay, that wasn't there, as you say, in the first process, that was absent.
Well, in the first process,
Yeah.
there was not going to be any compensation.
No, and there was an appeal to the provincial government to come in and you know, squash. Well,
Yep.
you
Yeah,
know.
and there was always an assumption that the province was going to do that. So therefore, we can do this, 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 and this, and Esquimalt, you just have to take this. And that, of course, was not what happened. And at the end of the day, Esquimalt did take one for the team, but fairly worked through and received compensation as well.
Okay. Mayor, I wish we had more time today, but it does go by quickly. But thanks so much for
Yes,
coming in
thanks
today.
so much, John.
Really appreciate your time.
I appreciate it.
That concludes the final segment of the CRD in Context.